to the Q&A. I think I'll get started with some of the notes that I wrote, and then we'll switch over to audience questions. Um, so, when I talk about the ancestral diet with my patients, a lot of them will say, well, weren't our ancestors' lives, nasty, brutish, and short? And then, okay, if you can convince me that that's not the case, if there's some reason for an ancestral diet, are we talking about pre-agricultural or post-agricultural revolution? We have like 140,000 plus years of human evolution before the agricultural revolution. So speak a little bit about what's the theory behind going to an ancestral template for diet lifestyle.
Think
Why does
about it
that make sense?
simply. We evolved to be NAD consumers, right?
Mm,
We hunt, we got out of the trees because our brains developed large, and our brains are fueled off of NAD. We don't have the big guts of the orangutan. We don't spend all our days in the trees digesting fiber and plants. We're able to do telemedicine Zoom calls like this because we are energy efficient. So we seek out the most nutrient dense food on the planet. That's red meat, that's NAD. That's how we fuel our mitochondria and our brains. So that's how I explain it to patients. That's the evolutionary aspect of this.
okay, great. The other thing, you mentioned sauna, helping with detox. Have you seen people coming in with like an MCAS type of presentation of long haul or VAX injury, and then maybe heat worsening their symptoms? Would you tell them to push through it or stop the sauna
Uh,
and try the cold?
no, the MCAS patient can't really tolerate sauna too much. And really these patients, they hurts a lot too. So sometimes we have to back off on therapies and go slower and pulse it. The Herx is tremendous for some of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the Herxheimer reaction, if somebody develops that, do you tell them to stop and then restart a lower dose, or do you tell them to push through that?
No, we slow down the dose. We pause therapy. Maybe we do it every other week. We do a lower dose because it can be debilitating. I had a
Yep.
patient; she was bedridden for 2 weeks with pain. You can't function like that.
Yeah, absolutely. You had mentioned zinc, not taking it by itself. Did you mean with other supplements or with food?
Yeah, I don't recommend just taking zinc by your copper ratio. So ideally, get that through the ancestral foods like oysters, high naturally in zinc, organ meats as well. But you're trying to, dose just zinc, and then how are you going to measure your zinc in a blood test? It's almost impossible. So try to get it through the ancestral foods rather than just supplementing in isolation with zinc, which can hurt your stomach anyway, make you vomit.
Absolutely. So you had mentioned the raw organ meats, and I mentioned that sometimes the patients, raw liver, particularly. Are you concerned? Some people will say, it's not safe, right? Like, you need to
Yeah.
cook it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I get that all the time. So, grass-fed is key. So you need to get a grass-fed organ meats. The conventional cattle that's raised on the feedlot and fed corn, their liver is so diseased, abscesses run in these cows at about a 70%, and that's why they need antibiotics all the time. Actually, the USDA wants to develop a vaccine for cattle to prevent abscess formation. You could just let the cow roam on pasture in the sunlight and it doesn't develop abscess, or you can develop a vaccine, and it's your choosing there. But for me, it's obvious. You choose the grass-fed meat, the grass-fed cow whose organs are healthy and preserved, and you get the most nutrients from this.
Makes sense. And you had also mentioned collagen peptides. What's the thinking there for long haulers and other people with chronic illness?
Yeah, so collagen peptides will give you those amino acids. Again, it comes back to peptide therapy again. Gives you the amino acids to heal the gut, one, reduce inflammation, and then also it gives you glycine and cysteine, the building blocks of N-acetylcysteine, which is the body's master antioxidant glutathione.
Okay, perfect. The other question was, you had mentioned the nattokinase serrapeptase. Some people will come in and say, they're allergic to soy, and we tell them lumbrokinase. But do you have any opinion on like the difference between nattokinase and lumbrokinase?
Yeah, so some people are allergic to the nattokinase, and I believe there's a problem with a fungus called aspergillus associated with that. So yeah, and soy as well. Some people do not like the soy component of that. So yeah, try lumbrokinase if that's the case, or try to find a quality source that does not make it with soy, doesn't have the aspergillus additive. So just find a good source for it.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Um, so one of our live stream viewers is asking. You just mentioned a patient with high blood pressure took ivermectin. Can you please explain what dose was it and for how long did he take the ivermectin?
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
patient who just took ivermectin, like I think it was for COVID, and his blood pressure resolved with it. I'm not certain why, but it was the standard 0.4 milligrams per kilogram by body weight.
Nice. Yeah, sometimes you see these chronic issues resolve and it's not quite explainable, but
Yeah.
maybe it's inflammation, maybe it's something else.
Maybe it's a parasite.
Maybe, yeah, exactly.
Knows?
On the topic of underlying parasitic infections, do you usually just are there certain ones that you see more commonly than others, or are you just seeing them being passed on the stool? You're not really sure what it is, and how do you address that in people who have them specifically? Do you offer them certain specific therapies that are antiparasitic?
Yeah, so we do the full moon protocol, which is 3 days before the full moon, 1 day on the full moon, and then 1 day off. And we use the biocidin protocol along with fenbendazole and ivermectin for this.
What's the idea around the full moon? Why are you doing that?
Yeah, so I may have shown the diagram there, but these parasites, they have a full cycle, and they get oftentimes in these cyst-like forms where these antiparasitics, they don't work, they're not effective. During the full moon, sometimes they come out of their cyst form, and you can hit them with the fenbendazole and actually treat them. Sometimes you don't even hit them then. You need to pulse this stuff sometimes over weeks.
That is so fascinating. I've never heard of that.
This is why our stool tests don't work.
I see. That makes so much sense.
You don't hit it right, and you get a negative stool test.
Oh, that's incredible. You know what it reminds me of is that in the East, in the Islamic world, there's this tradition of fasting on the 3 days of the full moon. So I wonder if there's any connection there. If fasting would help you, fight off those parasites.
Sure.
Yeah. That's fascinating, man. I love, I learned so much from talking to every guest. It's just incredible. So thank you. All right, so fenbendazole, that's obviously like an antiparasitic, and then ivermectin also has antiparasitic effects. And you had said 3 days before, 3 days during, and 3 days after?
Yeah, 3 days before, 1 day on full moon, and then 3 days after.
Okay, 1 day on the full moon. Okay, perfect. All right, so let's see. Somebody says they're very curious about specific blood testing for microclotting, and you did mention the D-dimer.
Yeah, D-dimer's good. You can get the pulse test. Dr. Harrington developed that. He's great. It's a cool test to use.
What is the pulse test?
Pulse test is basically a bunch of inflammatory markers conveniently packaged that this Dr. Harrington has been researching and identifying. He got pretty infamous for a time because he identified that the vaccine precipitated these high clot risk markers. That he was developing this test to prevent cardiovascular disease in patients, but then he did the study and showed that the vaccine increased clots molecules that precipitate clot formation or increase cardiovascular disease. And you can order the test through Pulse, get it shipped, and have it drawn anywhere.
Okay. Do you know how the cost? They're also asking what the cost is. Is that an
cost? I don't know. Cash probably about $300, but it's sometimes covered by insurance. But conventionally, I get a D-dimer, a CRP, an ESR. Those are the 3 tests I order routinely in every patient.
So, I'm telling everyone that I meet about this. So, Risha Pretorius, she's studying microclots over in Germany. She's one of our guests here at the summit as well in the next couple of days. So what she told me is that she's visualizing the microclots under a microscope. So she's staining the blood, and everyone that she's checked, and she's treated over 1,500 people for long COVID and vaccine injuries. She said everyone she checks has microclots that are abnormal. They're much harder to dissolve than similar type of microclots that are seen in diabetics and some other chronic illnesses. So these are amyloid fibrin clots. And in her experience, the clots they're very hard for the body to break down. So the clots are not being broken down very quickly. And all the kind of like clotting factors, including the D dimer, is trapped inside the clot. So oftentimes you'll have a negative D dimer if they're not being broken down. And so she said the only thing that she's found in her practice that correlates, somewhat with microclots in these patients is alpha-2 antiplasmin and von Willebrand factor sometimes. So she's really big on triple anticoagulation therapy or the nattokinase serrapeptase and those kind of things.
Oh, she's a fan. Good.
Yeah. So let's see. Is it possible that the thyroid is messed up after COVID so much so that it causes the fatigue and other symptoms? Is it possible that my fatigue will get resolved if I get the thyroid under control? And can this be done without medication treatment?
Yeah, so basic building blocks for thyroid, B vitamins, selenium, iodine, right? Those are low-hanging fruit that you can try to optimize. Get your T3 level tested. You want to see where that's at. And if you're bedridden with fatigue, ask your doctor to prescribe natural desiccated thyroid, right? It goes back to animal-based nutrition. This is porcine extract, porcine thyroid extract. You're just giving it back to your body. Think of it more natural. If you're suffering, it's a natural prescription medication that you can get, and it can really change your life.
And people can even get like bovine thyroid. It's just not like the dose is not controlled, but they can get it without prescriptions also.
True.
But yeah, there's a controlled kind of like you get a controlled equal dose each time when you're getting the prescription. So it's just a better way of kind of like making sure you're getting the same dose. But another question that we have here for you is the case you presented with the 80-year-old. Which blood tests do you remember which ones you started off? Which blood tests you used to diagnose her, and what was the first step in her treatment?
Yeah, so for the 80-year-old, it wasn't a blood test. That was a salivary hormone panel. Yeah, that's a salivary hormone. I don't know if I had an example.
And that's important because some people test blood hormones, right?
Yeah, so cortisol, you can obviously only measure that in saliva. Otherwise, you'd be at the lab all day drawing blood. So no, cortisol comes up in the morning, comes down in the evening. So the only way to really measure it logistically is with saliva. But Access Labs also offers the test for the other hormones too. It's very convenient and pretty affordable.
Yeah, we have another question that's basically the same thing, saying that FLCCC also recommends testing cortisol levels, and obviously you do order. Do you order it in everyone? And how, when you see it, like what kind of abnormalities can you see on it, and how does that affect your treatment protocol for somebody?
Yeah, so for this old lady, I was not expecting a flatlined cortisol. It took me by surprise. But you will have a hint that you have abnormal cortisol if maybe you can't sleep at night, you're stressed, your thoughts are so high. That's probably a sign of high cortisol at night. Or maybe if you're super sluggish in the morning and you don't want to wake up, that's probably a sign of low cortisol. So that might give you a hint to order a salivary panel.
I see. That makes sense. And then, so if you do see the cortisol, and I know you mentioned what you did for her, but what are some of the steps that you take when you see a cortisol deficiency or abnormality too high at one point or too low at another point?
Yeah, so the conventional method is to do Cortef or corticosteroids, but I'm not a huge fan of that. I prefer to do more natural routes. So you can think of the precursors to cortisol and try to support that through animal-based nutrition, adrenal extract, pregnenolone, DHEA. These can sometimes help. Melatonin, studying the circadian rhythm, so grounding in the morning, seeing the sunlight when it comes up, seeing the sun when it comes down. Trying to set your body back on a natural cycle can be helpful.
And another question here is, how do you suspect the presence of reactivated viruses? I'm assuming things like EBV, CMV, and is it low CD8 or a set of specific symptoms? Do you do certain testing to look for those in certain cases?
Yeah, I don't chase viruses very much. I try to support the body, right? We're trying to build muscle mass back. We're trying to decrease your visceral fat, give you back nutrients, give you back your hormones so that you can fight off things like EBV. EBV should not be ending your life, right? But people will measure high EBV and say, it's the EBV. Is it the EBV or is it something else that your body is not able to fight EBV, right?
Yeah.
That's my point.
Yeah, and just, trying to kill the EBV, which is some people's approach, right? Just give them Valtrex 3 times a
Yeah,
day for 3 weeks
maybe. I
or
don't know.
something. But still, I take your point also that, like, well, if the problem is that your body's, not strong enough to suppress it, then, just trying to kill it's not going to do much. It's just going to come right back. But it's never going to be
Your
gone
body,
completely, right?
exactly. Your body should be able to fight off most things. It should be able to fight off parasites too. It should be able to fight off Lyme, EBV. It should be able to fight off COVID too. And it probably should be able to fight off most of the vaccine injury. I mean, maybe you get a bad batch once in a while and nothing you can do, and a healthy guy gets ended by it. But there was probably poor detoxification process, something underlying that puts you into the state that you're in now.
Okay. Do you go into methylation issues with people? Do you check things like homocysteine or
Mhm.
check genetic testing for methylation? How does that influence your protocols?
No, I don't check genetic stuff like that. I just advise the ancestral diet. So you can get methylated B vitamins if you just eat real food, right? If you take a supplement, yeah, you have to then do all these difficult things.
Absolutely. Um, Someone's asking, the FLCCC protocol was updated recommending antibiotics, I think doxycycline for the BA4, BA5 variants. Were you also on board with that? Did you think that was important for BA4 and BA5?
For acute treatment of COVID, some people need antibiotics like that. But doxycycline, why has this been helpful? Same like azithromycin, it's anti-inflammatory. So again, it's an anti-inflammatory modality. Um, I try to not nuke patients' guts with an antibiotic if I can avoid it.
Yeah, makes sense. You've never had an antibiotic. I
Yeah.
applaud you and your parents. Um, so, in your experience, what percent of patients have seemed to develop pericarditis post-COVID or vaccine? I guess the long haulers maybe who come to you. Do you see that a lot? And could colchicine be beneficial for them? And do you use
Ah,
colchicine at all for long haulers?
wow. No, I'm not using colchicine, but I know a guy who's been on allopurinol and it helped him prevent any sort of COVID infection. And I know another guy who was on allopurinol and he got lung hauler.
Mm,
I don't know if it's necessarily protective or so. It's anti-inflammatory, sure.
okay. Um, All right, so new onset diseases such as hypothyroidism, diabetes, post COVID, and previously healthy individuals. Are you seeing a lot of stuff like that? And for the case study of the lady where the MP thyroid worked, do you think she'll need to be on it for life?
Good question. She came to me initially because her thyroid was not working, but she could still function. The COVID seemed to accelerate her disease process, where it pretty much ended her ability to perform daily activities. So we saw, at least in that case and some of the other cases, that they had an underlying disease process there, and the COVID or the vaccine accelerated that disease to make intervention.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so can you just tell us your website again? Somebody's asking where they can find you online.
IronDPC.com.
Awesome. And you do telemedicine?
In Florida only, and not
Oh,
licensed
okay.
in the other
Okay.
states.
It's interesting. I spoke with Dr. Salibi, and so Dr. Pierre Corey's has a partner, I think, who's a NP or maybe a PA. But they discovered that there's a something called the First Nations Medical Board.
Mhm.
Have you heard of this? Where
I'm
you
getting
can?
into that.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm talking to the body. I don't know if you're aware of them. They're a parallel health society. They're trying to develop an infrastructure so that we can use the First Nations method of licensure and maybe help more people.
But what is that? The body?
The body, yeah.
How do you find them? Or them?
I can get you in contact with them.
Okay.
They're pretty cool. They're starting up and they're going to get bigger real soon.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. I was thinking of getting whatever it's called, licensed or whatever, the First Nations Medical Board, to try to see people in all 50 states because it's impossible to get licensed in all 50 states. It takes forever and it's
It's so
extremely expensive.
expensive. My
It's
God.
extremely expensive. And also now, I mean, I got licensed in California and now I'm like regretting it. It's like, with this legislation that's passed over there in California, I don't know if you heard about it, but it's going
Oh
to
yeah.
be live in January. Yeah. I mean, it's like, me
Okay.
and a lot of other people are like, can we cancel our license in California?
Can I get
um,
it? Can I give it back?
yeah, seriously. All right, so back to the questions in the live stream. There's like hundreds of people here on a bunch of different channels. Let's see. How do you? Okay. No, I missed one. Or maybe I'm in the wrong place. Okay. So, what are the steps to getting higher muscle mass?
Yeah, so progressive resistance training. So building a program, maybe hiring a personal trainer if you're new to this, but starting out slowly with the right technique and progressively increasing resistance over time, whether that's higher weight, more reps, more time under tension. And then again, the other component is diet, optimizing nutrition, getting the right protein, NAD into the diet, and then optimizing hormones, specifically if you're of an older age.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've heard that you kind of have a window where you can most easily add muscle mass. When you're younger, you have higher testosterone levels, especially with men. And then if you've missed that window and you're in your 40s, 50s, or above, do you think everyone who's kind of got to catch up in their older age is going to need hormones? Like
Well,
supplemental?
sometimes you can get lucky enough where your hormones are preserved with age. My dad preserved his hormones. He eats a very good diet, very holistic, doesn't take antibiotics and so forth. But most of the time, I see hormone depletion with age, and patients struggle, fat mass, weakness. They don't see the results in the gym. They go to the gym, they're in pain for 4 days because they don't have the growth hormone factors, the testosterone. Women, they don't have progesterone, so they don't sleep at night, so they don't recover. It goes on and on endlessly. And so, if you're struggling, get your hormones checked. Try to optimize.
Do you think there's any risk of supplementing hormones with, if you do it in the right way, right? Bioidentical hormones and you're monitoring them and, best practices. Do you think there's still maybe some risk that we don't know of with long-term use over 20, 30, 40 years? Have we had long-term follow-ups with, proper bioidentical hormone replacement therapy that would make us feel comfortable and that there's no risk?
Well, you can think about it this way: there's risk to being without it. Men
Yeah.
with low testosterone, increased cardiovascular disease. Women with no estrogen, women after hysterectomy who are not given hormone replacement, increased risk of Alzheimer's dementia. Okay, no progesterone, increased risk again of cognitive decline. Again, no estrogen, risk of fractures. When you have a fracture, your risk of death, hip fracture of an elderly, risk of death in the next 2 years, 40%. Okay, so there's real risk that we know of not doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, so this is basically, it seems like the same question. Does it make sense to test all long haul patients for hormones like testosterone, DHA, cortisol, etc.?
Oh yeah, everyone gets a hormone panel coming to me.
Okay, and in the case study that was discussed, it was replacement therapy. Should she have to take this for life? I think maybe this is the same question. Can we try treating with her other long haul meds as recommended by the FLCCC? And so I guess maybe could her hormones normalize? Have you seen that happen where you can come off the hormone replacements?
I mean, I've done it in younger people. I have like a bodybuilder. He does testosterone in his age 18, shuts down his natural production, and then yeah, you can turn it back on. You can do some therapies. Thyroid may be a different story. I think if you heal what was triggering the autoimmune thyroid disease, it's possible that you may not need thyroid medicine your whole life.
That makes sense. Is there a difference in your experience between treating long haulers versus post-vaccine syndrome patients?
No, there's no difference. They both suffer endlessly.
And then sauna versus infrared sauna. What are your thoughts on that?
We do both.
Yeah, they're both good. The infrared saunas tend to be lower heat, and there's benefits from the higher heat, and there's benefits from the infrared.
Yeah, I love red. Infrared light is fantastic as well. If you're trying to heal thyroid autoimmune disease, look into red light therapy.
Okay. And have you had any experience with Mravroc or using fluvoxamine or Mravroc?
I mean, I used that in the urgent care settings back when I was working in the pandemic. I would use that in the acute setting for patients because, working conventional urgent care, you get a slap on the wrist for prescribing hydroxychloroquine. Fluvoxamine, no one looked twice. So, yeah, I would prescribe it for some of these patients. Yeah.
Okay. This seems more like it's a very incomplete question. I'm going to try to make sense of it. So they say autoimmunity, fasting and spike protein and autophagy. If you can connect those disparate ideas together, any comments on those?
Yeah, autophagy is great. I think it can be very helpful for the overweight patient, but I don't use autophagy for some of my thinner injured patients, right? Because that's basically fasting, trying to enhance cellular turnover. But some of these patients, they do struggle with eating food because they have such low energy. And so, I try to enhance NAD as best I can and get them to eat some protein and so forth.
Okay, and I guess do you have a specific approach to testing for autoimmunity, and if somebody has it, treating it with diet or whatever?
Yeah, so patients that come to me, they typically will get education in the ancestral diet or autoimmune paleo diet, as Terry Walls likes to call it. But it's probably the best way to reverse autoimmune disease is doing something like carnivore diet, Paleolithic, ancestral diet, because you remove the things that cause autoimmune disease through the diet, right? The Kentucky Fried Chicken, the Chick-fil-A, the seed oils, right? Soybean oil, canola oil, rapeseed oil, all this stuff, these machine lubricants that everyone's putting in their body every day, all right? It's killing the US. Get it out of the diet, and you might see some autoimmune factors resolve for yourself, right?
Yeah, definitely. Are those for people with autoimmune disease who resolve it with dietary interventions like that? Are those expected to be lifelong, or is it a reintroduction phase once
You know,
they've fully resolved?
I try to heal the gut with the gut healing protocol because again, the gut contains most of your immunity, right? So that's the biocidin, that's collagen, bovine colostrum, and BPC 157. That's my protocol for trying to heal the gut. I think if you heal your gut barrier, you won't have leaky gut syndrome, and then maybe you can have a pizza, you can have gluten, a high quality bread product, and maybe you won't get a flare of eczema, psoriasis, or brain fog, and so forth. But for the patient who's delicate, who's injured, leaky gut syndrome, you're just trying to get through the day, you have to be more strict with the diet.
Okay, I know this is one of those questions where it's like missing a lot of information, but maybe you can just give us kind of like some general guidance on this. My mom suffers with terrible joint pain, and none of the medication prescribed by her rheumatologist is helping. What do you suggest is our next step?
Well, low dose naltrexone is fantastic. I've helped a lot of people get out of joint pain with that. Hydroxychloroquine has helped a lot of my patients. Ivermectin. Growth hormone peptides, CJC, ipamorelin, MK677. They help with collagen synthesis. These are fantastic at fixing the diet, right? Getting rid of inflammatory foods, gluten, seed oils, and so forth, processed stuff. This can all help pain, joints, inflammation.
Yeah, I mean, once in a while, I don't see this a lot, but people come in and say after, with their long COVID, they have neck pain or they have like pelvic pain. Somebody was saying that. I mean, I know with some viruses, there are these like post-infectious like arthritic syndromes, and in some cases, it may be related to autoimmune disease. So as you were saying, maybe an autoimmune diet also would be an important part of the protocol.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I think we made it through all the questions, amazingly enough, and we're just about out of time. There might be one more question coming in, but before that, anything that you want to leave us with that we may not have asked you, or just final thoughts?
Just remember, it's N of one. We can follow protocols. We can try to come up with guidelines, and they can help guide us, right? But still, you need to try things out, experiment, try to see how you can optimize.
Makes sense. Yeah, and N of one, just I guess for people who aren't up to date in their science terminology, means like, an N of like 100 in a science study would be like you have 100 people that you're trying different things on, and it kind of makes sense when certain things work most of the time for certain symptoms, but in this case, N of one means that we're not finding some specific things that like we can't study 1,000 people with one medication and expect it to work in all of them. It's like very highly variable in every patient.
That's the thing with most of medicine, right? We try to get big randomized trials, and what do you get? You get statins for 70 years. That's what we get.
Yeah. So one final thought here. Somebody is writing, my mother had skipped beets post-vaccine. She's already on statins, and the doctor told her not to eat bananas. Didn't give a reason. I can't think of why you would avoid. Oh, maybe she had a potassium issue. Maybe she had high potassium or something. It's possible. All right, Stefan, thank you so much. Again, people can find you at irondpc.com. Any other places where you post or?
Yeah, my YouTube channel, I post pretty regularly on there. You can learn a lot of subject matter there. I do all this research on my own time. And if you're learning about peptide therapies, I go through the primary, so you can always find interesting stuff. That's Iron Direct Primary Care on YouTube. I haven't been banned. And then Rumble also Iron Direct Primary Care.
Yeah, so let me know, keep in touch and let me know if you do end up seeing patients in all 50 states. You know, I know a lot of people would love to come by and see you who are not in Florida if you do end up expanding. All right, again, thank you so much, and have a good one. Thanks for being with us. All right, bye.